Welcome to Echo Ekoji, where we listen deeply to the voices of our Sangha. I'm Andrea Chapman.
And I'm Joe Gochi.
Today we are honored to be joined by Brant Horio, a longtime member of Ekoji Buddhist Temple, a committed Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, and someone who has thought deeply about the intersection of modern life and the Dharma.
We're really excited to talk with Brant about his journey into Buddhism, his evolving understanding of Shinran Shonen's teachings, and how artificial intelligence, or AI, might become a partner in our spiritual lives. You'll find links to Brant's Harmony in the Dharma and the Dharma remix in the comments section. Andrea, let's start the interview.
Your piece, Harmony in the Dharma, begins with the idea that Buddhism doesn't prescribe solutions, but instead reveals universal truths about suffering. How does the practice of deep listening help us personally connect with these truths?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this Dharma Remix project and what it means and how it started. This Medium post on what I'm calling the Harmony and the Dharma is meant to kind of talk about what I view as sort of the role of AI and how that helped that project kind of kick off. But I think what underlies all of it is this idea of one of the most beautiful gifts that Buddhism offers, and what I tried to highlight and emphasize in that piece, and is that Buddhism doesn't really give us a formula for how to fix suffering, right? It doesn't say like, you do steps 1 through 5, everything's going to be fine. Instead, it invites us to find this lifelong relationship with the reality of life, with all its change, its sorrow, its beauty. And deep listening is how we begin that relationship, in my opinion. It's about how we sustain it. And in our modern world, we're really trained to be fast problem solvers. We diagnose, we fix, we move on. Deep listening asks us to do something very radically different. It has asked us to pause, be present with what's happening, our grief, our confusion, our joy, without trying to immediately control it or fix it. It's about letting understanding come first before a response or action. And when we listen in this way, the Dharma, it stops becoming this abstract idea or set of teachings to memorize. It becomes something that's really alive, that meets us exactly where we are and whatever our current conditions might be. And because life is always changing, because we are always changing, how we hear the Dharma will change too. So listening isn't a skill we check off once. It's an ongoing practice that evolves as we do. And in this world that sort of rewards speed and productivity and certainty, practicing this kind of listening is actually, to be honest, like quite brave. It's an act of saying connection matters more than control. Understanding matters more than winning. And in that space, even if nothing gets, quote unquote, fixed, something a lot deeper unfolds. Compassion, patience, a sense of that we're held in this larger flow of wisdom that we can take advantage of. Shinran Shonin, the founder of Shin Buddhism, really lived in that spirit. He didn't see himself as somebody who had mastered life. He saw himself as somebody who trusted the deep call of the Dharma he had heard. And even through his own struggles and limitations, his humility was such a powerful reminder that we don't have to achieve awakening. We simply have to be willing to listen again and again. And that's incredibly empowering. We don't have to be perfect listeners. We just have to keep listening.
That heartens my soul. Thank you for saying that. You describe Shin Buddhism as a tradition deeply rooted in listening. Can you recall a specific moment, whether listening to a teacher, a text, or to life itself, when that kind of listening transformed your understanding of the Dharma?
Yeah, as you explore the Dharma remix and some of these pieces, the first one that I'd written was very easy for me to write because it definitely was about this very specific thing that you're asking. And for me, it's how the Dharma opened up for me during my hardest times in terms of dealing with grief and loss of my loved ones. And this metaphor of the ocean that maybe I've talked about before, was truly, truly impactful. Like it covered all these ideas of all these things that I'd learned and kind of read about of impermanence and interdependence and causes and conditions and the persistent truth of the Dharma. And all of those things really came to life where, this idea of us as physical beings, physical shapes of waves that our lifespan is measured between when that wave was created and when it crashes upon the shore. Physical form goes away, but everything flows back to this greater ocean, which are reflective of like our influences on everybody else. And in that sense, who my grandma was is never fully gone. Who my mother was is never fully gone. That was for me like a turning point in the Dharma where I'm like, I'm living this. This totally makes sense.
Thank you.
Well, in our increasingly fast-paced and noisy world, what are some of the greatest challenges to sustaining deep listening? And how do you see modern technology, especially our constant connectivity, shaping or perhaps hindering this practice?
Yeah, I think one of our greatest challenges with deep listening today is simply the pace and the volume of life around us, right? And we're constantly bombarded with notifications, updates, pressure to respond quickly. And over time, I think that really conditions us to sort of skim the surface, right? Doom scrolling, to react, to move on, rather than settling into sort of a slower, deeper world and the work of truly listening. Deep listening takes time. It asks us to be willing to sit down with uncertainty, with ambiguity, and even with silence. But modern life, in this rewarding of the speed, certainty, quick results, we have to consciously create space for that listening. And it's not just physical space, it's also about emotional and mental space. And it's easy for that muscle to weaken the less we practice it. And technology plays a really complicated role here, I think. It's easy to blame our device, our apps, but the deeper question is about, I think, how we relate to those things. Technology can absolutely fragment our attention if we're not mindful. It can also be used it can if we use it with care, and it can create new ways for us to listen, though, and present with us voices that we might not otherwise hear, teachings we might not otherwise encounter, to deepen our understandings. For example, like this morning, I think just out of habit, usually what happens is, roll over, pick up my phone and start looking at headlines and things like that. But my daughter had sort of barged into the bedroom to talk about her seventh grade dance the night before and how much fun it was. And please look at these videos. Of course, that meant like, look at these 10 minutes of videos, right? But it was a conscious, intentional choice to put down the phone and, be in that moment. It was a conscious decision the night before to say, okay, work can actually be done a little bit later, even though I have that deadline because my son asked me to play a board game. It's a conscious decision to try to always find time to read, and the conscious decision to make sure that those things that I'm reading sometimes are the things that my kids find really interesting, to create those opportunities for connection, time, conversation. So I think it's a deep listening today is really an act of kind of almost like resistance. It's about saying, I won't be rushed past my own life. I won't lose my capability to hear what matters the most. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
I won't be rushed past my own life. I'm going to remember that. Thank you. Brant, do you see any parallels between deep listening in Buddhism and the way we interact with AI? Can AI deepen or distract from our capacity to truly listen?
Yeah, I think I think there's definitely real parallels with deep listening in Buddhism and the way we can potentially interact with AI, right? So at its heart, deep listening has never really been simply about absorbing information, right? It's about showing up with presence, with discernment, with humility. It's about willing to let go of fixed ideas and to really engage in a real relationship. It's whether that relationship is with a teacher, with life itself, or interestingly enough, right, in the theme of this conversation, with a partner, a digital partner like AI. And when we engage with AI casually or passively, it can become just another distraction, just like we had talked about. feeding us quick answers, reinforcing our own assumptions, being our own echo chambers, or keep us skimming along the surface of things. But when we approach it mindfully, I think with the same spirit of the inquiry that we bring to a Dharma message or a heartfelt conversation, it can actually deepen our reflection. It can surface questions we haven't thought about. It can mirror back to us our own curiosities, our blind spots, even our capacity for compassion. One of I think the truly awe-inspiring things about where we are right now is that I think for the first time in human history, advances in large language models like ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and all of these other tools gives us almost near instant access to almost the entire body of knowledge, art, struggle, aspiration that humanity has sort of shared over time. And it's like being given the ability to step into the world's largest library, right? A centralized largest library. And not to memorize everything within that library, but to listen differently to many voices at the same time, the many experiences, the many truths that have been offered, and to engage with that opportunity really intentionally, with curiosity, discernment, humility, like I mentioned before. And I think AI helps us ask better questions, sort of in that. It exposes us to perspectives that maybe we may have never encountered before, right? Or have been able to, and it supports our search for like a deeper meaning, a deeper understanding than just sort of shallow answers. So yeah, I think AI can definitely deepen or distract our capacity to truly listening. But the key is remembering that listening is always an active, living choice.
Thank you.
At what point in your personal or professional life did AI shift from being just a tool to feeling more like a creative partner? And what really changed for you?
Yeah, I think early on, so in my job in technology, I use AI a lot. I use it every day, actually. And I think early on, especially with the advent of large language models, I use it mainly as a tool, right? It helped me summarize documents, brainstorm ideas, automate little tasks. Very functional, very mechanical type of assistance. It was helpful, but not, particularly inspiring. And I think the shift came when I stopped treating AI as sort of like this vending machine, right? You put a one and done experience where you put something in, you get something out, and you instead considering it more as a conversation partner. So instead of asking it a question and getting an answer and then moving on, it's more about doing an iterative back and forth process of asking deeper questions, taking the context and asking, probing a little bit more, forking off and doing those kinds of things, and following those unexpected threads really led to new ideas that could emerge that I hadn't considered at the start. And when I realized that this back and forth sort of relationship engagement could keep unfolding and unfolding, leading into new questions, new perspectives, new creative directions, it felt really like something that was incredibly familiar. And it's a funny story because it reminded me of a lot of some of my childhood of going to the library. And this was, you know, prior to, the internet. And you have something like, if you recall the World Book, the encyclopedia set, right? That was my favorite book, my quote unquote book when I would go to the library. I'd pick a random letter and open up to a random page and then learn as much as I could about whatever the thing was, like an animal or a machine or something. And for the parts that I didn't understand, that would cascade into, oh, let's go find that letter, and I'd read that. And then either I would keep digging or I would get totally distracted by something on the adjacent page and be like, oh, that sounds really interesting too. And then before you know it, it's like hours later and I'm just kind of just digging through the World Book. And then that moved into Wikipedia, which is basically allowing me to do the exact same thing, but way faster and a lot deeper. And then now you have, large language models. And I think that's sort of just an evolution of what AI is. It's an evolution of the tool, but I think, to answer the question, it was that switch was that back and forth, the constant ability to discover and explore, and to challenge and to just learn. I think is when things flipped.
I'm having flashbacks right now because my mom and dad purchased World Book Encyclopedia set for my brother and me, late 1950s. Uh, the
Door-to-door
postcard,
salesman, right?
yeah, yeah, it was
Yeah, I
postcard
remember.
catalogs and bookmobiles and that sort of
That's
thing.
right.
Hey, so many people fear that artificial intelligence might dilute or replace human creativity. Yet you argue the opposite, that it can enhance our capacity for reflection and iteration. Can you unpack that a little bit more for people?
Yeah, I think it's a really honest concern, right? And totally can understand the fear that AI could dilute or replace that creativity. Um, but my experience is that it's actually the opposite if we approach it the right way, right? And I think I think where that boils down to is understanding or accepting that AI doesn't create meaning, right? It doesn't experience life, heartbreak, hope, wonder. It can only generate patterns, words, melodies, but the meaning, the feeling, the insight that comes from us, right? Large language models are simply predictive models of what's the next best word that should come next in the sentence. It's just a predictive model, but it's not about generating meaning. And when I work with AI creatively, whether it's with writing or music or Dharma explorations, for example, I don't see it as replacing my creativity. I see it as it's sort of expanding the playground, right, of where I'm at. It offers raw materials, unexpected angles, surprising questions, helps me move past blocks, it challenges what I'm thinking about, it sparks new directions that maybe I wouldn't have found on my own or had the time to even think about. But it's still me, right? My experiences, my reflections, my discernment that gives shape and depth to what emerges. Um, and I think that points to something bigger about creativity itself. Uh, Creativity isn't this like sudden lightning bolt, right? The throwing of the papers in the air and yelling "Eureka!" It's about this an unfolding process of reflecting, iterating, reshaping, revisiting. And true creativity, I think, it lies in that willingness to keep listening, like we've been talking about, to keep questioning, to keep evolving. And I think in that spirit, AI really plays a great supportive role for creativity. It gives us more chances to reflect, more frames to consider, more starting points for diving deeper into different parts of it. Um, yeah, and creativity is relational, right? It's all about context. It's um, uh, the greatest art, the most powerful insights, all of these things arise in some kind of dialogue. It's about with other people or with life or the world around us. So yeah, ultimately AI, I think, doesn't decide what's meaningful, right? We do, right? As humans, we're the meaning makers, and I think that's a profoundly empowering truth.
Thank you.
You've written about how generative AI helped you push through limitations in music composition. How did that experience reshape your broader understanding of AI's potential in the context of Buddhist practice?
Yeah, I think one of the most surprising gifts that really came out of use of generative AI, especially what we're talking about with music composition, is that it helped me break through. I think a lot of some of the inner limitations that I didn't even realize were sort of holding me back in terms of how in the ways that I could express myself, and in a super fascinating way, in ways that I never thought I would ever be proficient in, because I wasn't able to dedicate my life to a lot of these requisite skill sets for music composition, music production. Um, so I think we'll get more into discussion of what the Dharma Remix project is about, but I think you know recognizing this potential of AI as that conversational partner to assist in deep listening allowed me to take a lot of stream of consciousness thoughts and to base that in some of the larger discourse around what Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is about, of Buddhism in general, and what that's about, and how to take those stream of consciousness and kind of turn it into something that I could reflect back and read it, that's read my thoughts in a different way, and then to listen to it with an emotional dimension, right, through music, in yet another way. So through my ability to, through my action of just putting in some loose thoughts, I get back to me many, many different perspectives, many different ways of listening, deep listening to the same thoughts that I had. And I think that improved how I would listen to the Dharma, right? My understanding of those teachings in really profound ways.
Some people argue that AI generated work, especially in spiritual and artistic domains, lacks authenticity or even heart. How would you respond to those who say that AI has no place in something as deeply personal as the Dharma?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of, I think, how to respond to the question that gets captured by, an earlier discussion we just had. But it is an absolute truth that AI by itself does not have, what we call or classify as like heart, right? It doesn't grieve, it doesn't love, it doesn't experience awe, it doesn't experience longing, right? It's, but here's the thing, right? I mean, neither does a paintbrush, neither does a musical instrument or a sheet of paper. Tools, whether it's ancient or modern, doesn't produce heart. It doesn't possess heart. We do, right? As the wielders of that creativity and that meaning. So I think that kind of suggests that authenticity really shouldn't be about the medium. It's about the intention, the presence, the sincerity that we can bring to a process. And I think if we approach AI mindlessly, right, chasing novelty, easy outputs, quick answers, convenience, then yeah, then what we can create is, and what people are creating, right, can feel really hollow or disconnected. But if you're using it differently, I think you get a very different outcome. And if you approach AI with the same spirit that we would be bringing to writing a poem or painting a landscape or chanting the Nembutsu, with that kind of intentionality, with that kind of presence, that sense of deep listening, then I think even this new medium that is evolving with us over time can be this vessel for really authentic encounters.
Thank you.
You've said that AI can prompt deeper self-reflection. What does it mean to listen to AI with the same intentionality that we bring to a Dharma talk, a sacred text, or our own inner voice, even?
Yeah, I think when we talk about listening to AI with intentionality, doesn't mean treating AI like a teacher in the traditional sense, treating it like a minister in the traditional sense. I think it means bringing the same qualities of heart and mind that we practice when we listen to a Dharma talk, to when we read a canonical text or when we sit quietly with our own thoughts. It's really easy, like we've discussed, right, in today's world to slip into this very passive consumption, skimming headlines, scrolling feeds, treating information kind of like a buffet of what we're interested in, and just kind of picking what we want down the line and casually grazing, right? But deep listening is really something that's different. It's active, it's intentional, it's relational, like we mentioned. It's not just taking in words. It's asking ourselves things like, what in that of what I just heard resonates with my experience? What challenges me? What calls me to reflect more honestly on my own life and my own situation? And we're not looking for easy answers in that mindset. Um, we're looking for a conversation between the Dharma and what our own living situation is. And I think in that spirit, AI can also be listened to deeply, not blindly accepting what it offers or gives us back, but treating it like a mirror, like a prompt, a starting point for where we want to have deeper reflection. Because in that discourse, as you try to explore and play around with this yourself, I think you'll find that approaching it in this way, AI will surface ideas, connections, angles that really surprise, and not because they're right or authoritative, right? But because they invite you to question, to wonder, to engage. And I think the real practice isn't about trusting or distrusting AI. It's about cultivating your own capacity to listen, discerning, humbly what you are being offered and how you want that to sort of reflect upon what you're looking to answer.
Great. Brant, you describe AI not just as a tool, but as a partner in your practice.
Yeah.
What does that partnership look like in real terms? And can you share an example of a time when AI's input helped refine your understanding of the Dharma?
Yeah, I think when I talk about AI as a partner in my own, personal practice of listening to the Dharma, it's 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 really about having it a part of a living dialogue of there is a convenience, right, of being able to talk to the AI anytime you want, or as a life event has occurred, that you can sort of reflect on it and have a medium to be able to dig down and not use that dialogue again to hand me answers, but something that invites deeper reflection, especially when my own clarity just feels really shaken, right? Um, and one example that stays with me is another Dharma remix piece that I've been working on, and it's about recent times and living in DC. The political upheaval and layoffs of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, and other things can really make things feel really, really chaotic, right? And there's just so much going on: social division, political uncertainty, suffering on so many scales, locally, internationally. I mean, globally. Right? It's just there's just so much, and I found myself really overwhelmed. So, um, and I think you feel sort of there's a lot of things that can happen, and I think one of the ways that I wrote about it was, there's two traps. One, you feel really numb and you just get paralyzed, but the other is like you're looking for this really grand solution. You're trying to, again, you're trying to fix things, right? Um, but in working out that conversation with AI, using a Buddhist lens on top of it, um, it allowed me to help think out loud in a way, right? To find somewhere in that dialogue an idea that gets surfaced. It's not, to be honest, like not flashy, not complicated, but it was really deeply grounding. And it was that sometimes the most powerful thing that we can do in the face of chaos is just practice one small kindness at a time, right? And excuse me. And it can seem so simple, right? But at that moment, but it brought me back to that really essential thought that the path isn't always about fixing the whole world at once. It's about offering compassion where we are. And it's something that I feel like I knew and I believed, but you kind of lose sense of that. Like as we are evolving and changing, it just dropped off my consciousness, right? So having that living discourse, that living dialogue, that pulled it out, and recognizing that one small kindness can just ripple outward in ways that we'll never fully see, and that really was very, very for grounding for me. And another thing that AI was very surprising for me in that discussion, that dialogue back and forth too, was um, uh, it challenged me with a question. It asked me where it said, in the situations where you are talking in this chaotic situation, right, with all that context, with people who you disagree with, it challenged me with the question that says, when you talk to them, are you going into that engagement, that situation, that conversation, that argument, with the intention to win or to listen,
Um,
right? Wow.
yeah.
In the moment, you're thinking, these are my enemies. Should I have enemies? It's really hard to like break out of that. But then to just have uh, that very grounding, very blunt truth kind of posed back at you, it was really enlightening. That was a surprising outcome, and that kind of comes from this ability to talk to this, have this dialogue with a partner like this, right? That has a larger understanding and doesn't offer it as a, you don't accept it as an answer, but you use it as a way to reflect on your own thinking.
Love that
Thank you.
mindset. There's a traditional view that authentic Buddhist insight must come from direct human experience, but in your work, AI seems to open new paths to insight. How do you address concerns about preserving the authenticity of the Dharma?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of prevailing themes from this whole conversation, right? And I think I want to clearly say that authentic Buddhism still and always arises from, I think, direct human experience. Um, no AI, no tool, no external source can ever walk the path for us, right? Insight doesn't come from clever words, novel technologies. It comes from our own lived encounters with impermanence, with suffering, with compassion, with the realities of life. And where AI comes in, it's not a replacement for that journey. It's more of a catalyst, right? It's a companion that can sort of spark that reflection, surface new questions, hold up the mirrors that that we referred to listen differently, think differently, feel differently. Um, yeah, but that work, that transformation still happens, within ourselves, within our own willingness to wrestle, to reflect, to surrender, to grow. And I think um, this is really in line with how the Dharma has always moved throughout the world over time, right? Buddhist teachings never stayed frozen in one language, in one form. It traveled across, India, traveled to China, to Japan, to beyond. It takes on new voices, new art forms, new expressions, but it doesn't lose its essential spirit. And I think that that authenticity of that Dharma um, doesn't depend on clinging to that single medium, right? It depends on the sincerity and the humility for which and how we engage it. So that's where the authenticity lies. It's not in the technology, it's not in the particular words that we use, but it's in this ongoing willingness to be real, to be present, to be transformed.
This is fabulous. And I'm so interested in where you're going with all of this. And so people that are listening to this podcast have heard us use the term the Dharma remix. Let's
Mhm.
talk about that. It's such a creative approach. It uses AI to reimagine Buddhist practice through music and poetry and self-reflection. Can you walk us through how it works?
Yeah. The Dharma remix was just this notional idea that I think I had when um, it's a remix of the Dharma, right? We have one way of listening to it, but what I loved about all the discussion that we've had up to this point is it's really been less about AI, right? It's really been less about the tools itself. It's been mostly focused on how do we interpret what this thing is called deep listening. And I think so it started with this idea, this hypothesis, right? That the more ways that we can listen to it, and the more ways we can present that to people, and who are curious about the path, who are on the path of Buddhism, um, have greater opportunities to to resonate, to map themselves into what that message is. So the Dharma remix was about this idea of presenting yet another one of those ways of inviting people, especially those who might feel intimidated by some of the traditional formats, right? Chanting and sutras and a lot of the texts, and engage the Buddhist teachings in ways that are much more, I think, sincere, practical, lived, that makes the message feel alive, personal, creatively accessible. So at its core, the Dharma Remix project is about taking essential Buddhist themes, suffering, impermanence, compassion, interconnectedness, and then reimagining them in creative mediums. And I think the way I've sort of set it up is like looking at it in three transformations, where you take a concept and you present it in a Dharma message that resonates with how I view it, but leave interpretation up for the reader, and then to convert that into a poetry form that's catchy and has some hooks, and then to listen to it yet again in the form of AI generated music to present those words in something again with like a little bit more of an emotional dimension. And um, that's I think uh, my homage to like this idea of deep listening, right? Take one idea, split it into three different things, but they're all interconnected, and then jump in at any point and see if any of those things resonate. But it is using AI as a creative partner and basically practicing this idea of deep listening, opening up new doorways, new entry points into what I think are timeless truths of what the Dharma is all about.
Thanks.
This is all really exciting, Brant.
Yeah.
So you've just mentioned that you've created music with AI that then explores themes like suffering, impermanence, and attachment. What has that creative process taught you about your own spiritual path?
Yeah, I think creating music, poetry with AI, especially around themes like suffering, impermanence, attachment, um, it has given me thought. It has, I think, reshaped some of my thinking, my biases, my own mental models of the world. Because I think what I've realized as I went through this process was that, it's one thing to understand the teachings intellectually. It's another thing to live into them, to feel the Dharma in different ways that surprise you, that humbles you. It's part of that creative process that sort of unfolds and continuously allows you to discover it in different ways. And I found that as I was working with AI in that creative way, I had to let go of a certain kind of control, right? I couldn't predict where a particular song or a poem or lyrics would go per se, right? I could guide it as a starting point, but I couldn't really always predict where it would go, and I had to let go of some of that control. And then the AI would suggest a metaphor or musical phrasing that I hadn't considered, and instead of forcing it to fit into my original idea, it again thinking about listening as a muscle, it allowed me to adapt and relearn how I would want to listen, and to take some of those ideas and to take the ones that made sense and the ones that I resonated with the most, and sort of pivot and keep changing and using that as ways of continuously adapting myself, and ask questions for things in my listening like what is it that's emerging here? What is this life in this particular moment with this thought? What is a new facet of the teaching that's revealing itself to me, and how do I think about that? How do I feel about that? And does that change uh, how else I would want to describe it or articulate what this teaching is and what it means for me? Because again, we as humans, as a creative inputs, control the meaning. We're the meaning makers, right? Um, and I think it just mirrored the Dharma in such a powerful way for me. Um, uh, yeah.
You've mentioned that AI sometimes reveals unexpected angles on familiar teachings. Can you recall a moment when an AI generated response surprised you and deepened your understanding of the Dharma?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just have to go back to that same discussion that I had when because I was so wrapped up in the chaos of what's going on in the DC area specifically,
Yeah.
right? And I work in industries that are directly impacted by a bunch of the things that the transition to the new administration is happening, right? And it was very, very easy to get lost in all of that chaos, and you feel very, very, I think, strong in certain viewpoints, and you know other conflicting viewpoints exist. And that one question of asking, challenging me of saying, are you in it to win the argument, or are you in it to listen? Because that made you stop and reflect and listen and say, right, if I'm in it to win it, I'm not really in it to put myself in other shoes or to um, or to act in any compassionate way or to think about other things that are within my control, right? That I can effectively do. So I think that was an entirely unexpected angle on a very familiar teaching that I feel like I should have known, right? It's the kind of thing that I try to teach our kids, that my wife and I try to teach our kids. Um, but yeah, it's very surprising to be able to listen and re-listen and re-listen, and AI really helps in that, I think.
Thank you.
For someone who's skeptical about AI's place in Buddhist practice, how would you suggest that they begin exploring the Dharma remix? And what's a gentle entry point for that?
Now, I think, um, and apologies for how I'm talking about AI to the listeners if this is like a very, very new topic. I think there's a lot of different entry points into not just Dharma Remix, but AI in general, if you're not a frequent user of it. And what I'm hoping, my hope is that the discussion so far has uh, tried to eliminate some of the bias that might be coming in, where you hear about AI and how AI can provide an answer. But our argument so far has been that you shouldn't accept it as just an answer. You should accept it as a dialogue
Yeah, yeah.
and use it as ways of reflecting upon yourself. And I think um, being skeptical about AI in general and AI's place in Buddhist practice is healthy skepticism is always a good thing, I think. Uh, and so I would invite folks to explore the Dharma remix with curiosity, not commitment. To think about that you don't have to believe anything coming into it. You don't have to accept any grand claim, like we're saying that you have to listen to what AI is saying. You just approach it in the same way that you might wander into a new section of a library you've never visited before. Open, you're unhurried. You just try to find what speaks to you, and recognizing that through our discussion so far that what you're looking at is not the output of a one and done, what AI has spit out, that it's been part of a creative process that I have helped to meaningfully shape and reflect my own interpretations of the Dharma that hopefully is being presented in a way that can resonate with others. So, with that in mind, as you get into the Dharma remix and you start, um, uh, you know, trying to live beside that skepticism as you are engaging with the project, I think instead of asking things like, is this valid? Is this the right way to practice Buddhism? Maybe start with some gentler questions, like, for example, what does this evoke in me? What memory, feeling, or insight does this bring up? Where do I feel resonance with what I'm looking at? Where do I feel tension? And then I suggest starting with just one piece, maybe a single poem or a song or a short reflective, article that I've uploaded to it, and just simply sitting with it, right? Not to evaluate it, but just listen to it the way we listen to life, patiently, curiously, willing to notice what arises, and treat the Dharma remix as not this I think set of teachings to obey, but I think as just as a mirror, and remembering that you as the human are the meaning maker.
There are real concerns about intellectual property and generative AI, especially around authorship, originality, and replacing human creativity. How does the Dharma Remix address these issues while remaining faithful to both Buddhist values and artistic integrity?
Yeah, these are definitely real concerns. They're definitely not anything that I take lightly. And I think in the Dharma remix, I try to meet those concerns by staying deeply anchored, sort of within uh, I think two commitments, right? The first one is about human presence, and the second one is about mindful transparency. So the first, you know, is around things thinking about AI in the Dharma remix is not treated as an author, right? So it's quote unquote author. It's a tool, it's a catalyst to surface ideas and metaphors and starting points. But the real work, the reflection, discernment, the emotional honesty, still belongs to me as a human being engaging with the Dharma, with experiences from my life and sort of my perceptions on creativity. Second, I think the originality is sort of reframed through a Buddhist lens. Um, you know, in Buddhism, we believe that nothing arises independently. That there's no isolated self-inventing enlightenment from scratch, right? So wisdom, compassion, they arise through countless causes and conditions, through relationships, teachings, struggles, insights that are shared across time. So in that same spirit, I think creativity isn't about isolated, ego-driven ownership. It's about again, participating in this very living, dynamic conversation, drawing from what's been offered, contributing our own voice, and offering it forward. But at the same time, I want to honor, something that's really real, which is that the foundations of many of these generative AI models, including the tools that I sometimes work with, are rooted in really complex unsettled ethical realities, right? Artists, musicians, writers, they've many of them have seen a lot of their works used without consent to train some of these models, and that harm it can't be brushed away lightly, right? So even when we use AI mindfully, we still carry the weight of that history. Um, so I don't pretend that uh, using AI in the Buddhist context erases those conflicts, right? And I believe it's important to stay humble, transparent, and sensitive to the fact that um, this technology's very existence is entangled with sufferings for some members of the traditional creative community. So that's why the Dharma Remix, I try to engage AI in a fundamentally different way from extraction or exploitation. So rather than treating it as this creativity as something to be consumed, I treat it as a dynamic relational process that requires reflection, requires gratitude, requires responsibility. Um, and just as importantly, Dharma Remix is not and never will be a commercial project, right? The things that it generates is meant to be shared to help teach and expand the reach of the Dharma, to offer opportunities to interpret the Dharma, not to sell it for profit from those creative expressions. Um, yeah.
That's good.
So, beyond individual creativity, what ethical questions come up when integrating AI into spiritual traditions? Could AI ever serve as a kind of teacher, or should it always remain in the realm of tools?
I think, especially in the state of where it's at, I mean, I think AI will always remain a tool, not a teacher, right? And I think, especially in the spiritual tradition, spiritual sense, like Buddhism, this is especially true. Because I think a true teacher in Buddhism, are ministers, are people that are very experienced and lived along on the Buddhist path. They don't simply, convey information or provide it back. It's those teachers embody the path, right? And they point us based on that experience. They can point us back again and again to our own direct experiences of the truth, to our joys, our sorrows, our confusions, what that means in context of what they've embodied and what they've lived, and how that can get couched within the Dharma. So no matter how sophisticated language becomes or sophisticated tools become, um, you can't live, AI can't live the compassion.
Yeah.
It can't live the grief, the joy, the surrender, the awakening. It can generate words.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be really beautiful,
Yeah.
sometimes really thought-provoking, but it can't embody the spirit of what the Dharma is. Um, yeah, and I think one of the real ethical risks of integrating AI into spiritual life is this temptation to mistake convenience from insight. And AI can produce polished, convincing responses really, really quickly, right? But the true spiritual insight is something that's messier, slower, that arises through encounters, mistakes, growth, reflection, deep listening. So yeah, that's why in my work with AI, I'm really clear that AI is a support, not a substitute. It can help surface questions. It can mirror back ideas to us and can invite creativity and spark new angles for reflection, but it can never replace the irreplaceable, which are things like the living relationship between a teacher and a student, the sangha, the community of seekers, right? They're trying to learn and seek support from each other. And this really messy, beautiful, unpredictable process of being human.
Yeah, it is a messy process, that being human. Brant, looking ahead, do you think AI might shape how Buddhism is practiced in the future? And what ethical or spiritual concerns do we need to be thinking about as we move in that direction?
Yeah, I think when I look forward, when I look ahead to the coming decades, right, I carry uh, real cautions, but also real hopes for how AI can shape Buddhist practice. I think, on the caution side, one of those risks is that the convenience can replace depth. It can generate, AI can generate really beautiful Dharma phrases, inspiring reflections, even entire simulated dialogues or discourse. Um, but practice is far more than elegant words, right? It's about transformation and living through this process of suffering to compassion to impermanence and to letting those truths reshape not just our hearts and our minds, but it's the mental model of the world around us from our own experiences. Another caution is around community, I think. Buddhism has always emphasized Sangha, right? We always talk about Sangha as being one of our three treasures. Um, and it's an essential part to have this community on this path. And if AI becomes too central, I think, to people's spiritual lives, it could maybe unintentionally foster this kind of isolation, uh, you know, with the relationship with being with the technology versus with other living beings that are also trying to find understanding and truth with on the path. But at the same time, like I said, I carry deep hope, right? I think AI has this potential to make uh, Dharma teachings far more accessible than ever before. I think across languages, across geographies, across barriers that have historically kept a lot of people away from formal Buddhist spaces. And I think part of that is, ironically, also the convenience aspect. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you have this really important thing that you don't want to lose and talk about, it might be a little bit more polite to be able to plug that into an AI tool and to use that as to start your reflection before you go back to bed versus waking up the minister and calling them, in the middle of the night. So I do think it could help uh, those who feel especially isolated from finding reflections on compassion, wisdom, interconnectedness in ways that they may have not otherwise encountered before. I also think that AI can support new creative forms of engagement. So in other words, just like Buddhist teachings themselves have flowed from calligraphy into chanting, into printing presses, into radio, the books, podcasts like Echo Ekoji. AI too can, really become this an additional vessel for how to reimagine what these timeless truths are about and how it can find a place within this very, evolving world that we live in. Um, but everything depends on how we choose to engage it, right? AI is not going to determine the future of the Buddhist practice. We will. We need to be the ones that are intentional. We need to be the ones who use it in a very discerning way. We have to be the ones who use it in a very humble way. We have to be the ones to sort of make sure that we foster and encourage this ongoing commitment to living the Dharma, not just replicating it or replacing it with AI.
You've said that Buddhism calls us to listen, not just to the Buddhist words, but to the world itself. If AI is now part of that world, what responsibility do we have to listen to it mindfully? And how can we make sure that what we hear stays in harmony with the Dharma?
Yeah, I think if I if I had to leave listeners with one message, it would be this: that you're already part of the living Dharma. You're already woven into this great unfolding of the wisdom, of the teachings, of the compassion that Buddhism points us toward. And it's not because you've mastered anything, not because you have perfect answers, but simply because you're alive. That you are alive, you're struggling, you're hoping, you're questioning, you're caring. The Dharma isn't something that's frozen in static ancient texts or really far off temples, right? It's something that meets exactly where we are. And I think in our pursuit for these kinds of truths amid all of this noise in the world, um, you know, I think it's upon us to ask how we can cultivate this deeper kind of listening. And it's about being not passive consumers, not having blind trust in things. You know, although I think, this idea of Shin Buddhism and, having that complete trust and the compassion is definitely part of it. But, with respect to AI, it's about not blindly trusting tools like AI. Um, and it's about being mindful, discerning, compassionate. It's to ask constantly, as we choose to listen and re-listen, as we mentioned, is about always asking things like, is what I'm hearing consistent with compassion? Is it consistent with humility? Is it helping me live more honestly, more generously, more in harmony with my life? And to make it a full circle, that's sort of in the spirit of what harmony in the Dharma was all about, is to recognize that the world's changing always, and including the arrival of tools like AI, but the invitation of asking yourself these kinds of questions and trying to listen to it in different ways, that invitation will always remain the same, to listen deeply, to listen carefully, and let that listening shape of how we can meet the world with compassion.
In the spirit of today's interview, I asked Chat GPT, the free version, what does Ekoji mean to you? Here's the response I received. Ekoji Buddhist Temple is a living bridge between ancient teachings and modern life, a welcoming community where people of all backgrounds come together in reflection, shared practice, and compassionate understanding. Rooted in the teaching of Shinran Shonin, Ekoji is a home where the Nimbutsu nurtures connection, belonging, and the rhythms of everyday life. Brant, what is your reaction to that?
Well, really, really clever and on theme thematic point there for you to do that, Joe. So I really appreciate that. I think that language really captures something beautiful, right? I mean, I think Ekoji is a bridge.
Yeah.
It is a living, breathing bridge between uh, teachings and the realities of modern complicated lives. So the other thing I really love about that response is that it sort of emphasizes these ideas of community, reflection, deep listening, because that's exactly what Ekoji has been for me,
Yes.
not just a place to study, but a place to belong, right? A place where you don't have to have perfect answers, a place where you can recite the Nembutsu with this rhythm of humility and gratitude and trust, and across while being immersed in all of these uncertainties of life,
Yeah.
right? Um, so yeah, I think it is a bridge between people, and I think AI really caught something true there. Yeah, and I think for me that's definitely the heart of Ekoji, right? It's a home for the Nembutsu, yes, but even more, it's this home for all of us who are still learning, still listening, still walking this path together.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Brant, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your heart, your insights, and your deep connection to the teachings.
Brant, we're grateful for the insights you've shared and for expanding our appreciation of how AI can intersect with Buddhism to benefit Sangha members and those seeking to learn more about Jodo Shinshu. This conversation has opened new pathways for reflection and possibility. Thank you.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks so much, and for to both of you for having me here today.
Until next time, this is Echo Ekoji. Nama Amida.